The Frame Center Podcast.
All right, so fortunate enough to have a lot of artists walking through this place, and today we got Mike Sleeper, who's agreed to come on and talk a little bit with us. He's here picking up a piece. What is the piece you're picking up today, Mike?
It's titled Duxbury Number 1, and it's finished out to about 64 or 65 inches wide or something, and it's going into a house in Duxbury, of course.
Yep.
And it's filling a big space over a mantle. So
yeah, nice. So, yeah, this is one of the larger ones, right? About the largest we frame, for you. The other ones, when we get bigger, that you're going on to dye bond and like really large pieces or really large canvases, like the ones we just recently had the pleasure of hanging down at the Marshfield Senior Center, right? Or is that what that place is referred to as?
It's the Marshfield Senior Center, and and I think they came out so well. That's a direction I'm going to head in now.
Well, with the canvases. With
the canvases, because I get to move past the constraints of traditional framing materials.
Yeah, mm-hmm. Glass.
The glass maxes out, and then at 60 inches essentially, and then we did a 90 by 30 canvas and a 60 by 60 canvas, and the impact is really, really profound.
Yeah,
well, once something gets that big.
I know when we were down there hanging them, people were, it was a showstopper. You've been getting good feedback from.
I get a ton of feedback from it, and there's all these people that go in there. It's the fun thing about hanging in a place like that is you never know who's going to see it.
Yep.
And it's the Marshfield Senior Center, but it's not just for it's set up for seniors, but the amount of younger people that go in and out of there is really amazing. Either they're bringing someone in or going in with someone they're a caretaker for. Or they're working there, and I'm finding a lot of people are contacting me, and it's like, wow, it just never occurred to me you'd be going into the senior center, and it turns out they volunteer there or something.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, it's funny too because when we were there, Scott, people were hanging the stuff, and they're like, one there was like I think someone that was almost wanted to argue with you that it was they thought it was a painting, and then the two like the people are just like. Who's oh my God, who's the artist? Yeah, and he's standing right over there.
Right there, yeah.
Which is always amusing. So
plus, I believe you got a few criticisms on where to hang it, right?
Yeah. I told you.
Too high, too high, too low.
Yeah, I think that shook. What's the Julie? Yeah, Erickson. Yeah, so I think that was like the first one. Everyone, especially in a spot like that, everyone's got an opinion, and
Well, it was the only spot that we had to figure out exactly because it's a rule of thumb to hanging.
Yeah.
And that one there were some constraints, so that was the only one we were making decisions on, and it was the first ones we did.
Yeah. The pivotal one.
The pivotal one, and immediately someone strolls by and makes a comment, and then goes out the door.
Yeah. You need to hang those a little bit higher. Meanwhile, we intentionally hung it higher than you would hang it because Because of the
chair rail. Of the
chair rail. Yeah,
exactly.
And the people are
for any.
So people wouldn't crash into it. So it's hard. I mean, be interesting to see how his pictures are hung at his house. Yeah, they're all just tucked under the ceiling.
An inch from the ceiling. Yeah, no crown molding.
Well, he was taller. So.
Yeah.
Oh, that was it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of funny. I mean, the rule of thumb is, which. Rule of thumb in the design stuff is usually it's 60 to center, which I tend to find is being actually kind of low.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And again, with all those rules, I think that you have to account for the space. I mean, ceilings are so high in some places now.
Especially now, yeah, they've opened them all up.
And things that are surrounding. And you go into somebody's house and they're all. everyone's like 6'2", 6'3" that lives in the home.
Yeah.
I mean, what are you're going to hang it for,
Yeah, they went from 8 to 10 ceilings to 10 to 12s now, so now you got to add those extra 2 feet in there somewhere. So
yeah, so that's always interesting. But that was a fun experience hanging it down there. And at the end, we also had to cut into the what kind of game? What were they playing? Spades or something?
They're playing mahjong, which I've only heard of it.
Yeah.
I know it's a thing, and they were all in there playing it and intently playing it.
Yeah.
And
I
They
tried to
didn't
chime
seem to
in.
mind.
I wanted to ask them for an opinion, but see if they were happy with where we were hanging.
You don't break concentration on mahjong. No, it is focus.
Fortunately, we were lucky that. But so nice to have Mike here, and he's in here probably every week, maybe some weeks a couple times a week, because he's
sometimes twice a day.
Yeah,
Busy man.
one of the South Shore's probably I would say you're probably one of the better known photographers on the South Shore for certain. I don't know who's the competition or the some other photographers around here that you enjoy seeing.
I frankly don't think of it as competition. But, but of course, there's Keld Mahoney.
Yep.
And
Keld's definitely got a name for himself.
Yeah, and Keld he's a big name these days, and then there's people that are flying under the radar who do amazing work.
Yep.
Michael Sullivan, of course.
Yep.
And but there's a lot of names. But then I consider myself an artist, so I think of the other artists and
I don't mean to throw it as competition. But I think that a lot of times people are interested. People that admire your work are kind of interested to hear like whose stuff you have hanging, or whose work you're interested in, because I'm sure that not everything hanging at your house is works of your own, right?
I have mostly oil paintings in the house that were inherited. Mm-hmm. We have some of my photography, some of my wife's, Lori's. Lori, she's very talented, and we have some of her work hanging, and then it's a smorgasbord of all these artists across the South Shore. We have a lot of Julie Eulers. Mm-hmm. We have a big Carrie O'Donnell painting, oil painting as you come in the front door, and it goes on and on and on. And,
do you have you have a Braga too, right?
I have a Braga.
Yeah, I think I heard the story behind that one. That was from your days as a wedding photographer.
Yeah, it may have been the last wedding I ever photographed. That's how not because I didn't enjoy it, which I did. And when you get a famous artist being the art director during a wedding, during a wedding, that's fantastic. Yeah. But so I ended up doing the wedding for him in exchange for the painting. And,
nice.
But all of these works of art, the thing I love about it is I think about all of the people who did them actually. And I look at Carrie's painting, which is quite large. Mm-hmm. I think of Carrie, and we have a Jody
Regan.
Jody Regan.
Mm-hmm.
I was mixing myself up with another Jody. We have a Jody Regan. I think of every time I think of it, I love the artwork, and I think about her too when I'm looking at it.
Yep.
And but then of course I've got a bunch of my work.
Well, I think that's nice too, and a lot of times having the story behind the artwork I think is so important.
Yep.
Like that Braga one.
Yeah.
He's an unbelievable painter, but what a kind of you told me the story about how he gave it to you, and that's stuck in my mind, and it's kind of it's such a cool story behind the painting too, as to why you have
That's the difference between buying local and buying from something that you just see online or something you see that way. You make the connection to the artist or to a story that you've told, and it makes you think of it every single time you see the piece. That's the great thing about it. So
Yeah, I know. For me too, especially with from my perspective, when I buy local art, a lot of times I kind of am favored towards customers that that come in here, because it's also a nice way to give back, and to also pick up some nice work. I just actually picked up a piece of Nancy Colella's from the South Shore Art Center show.
We have four.
We have four Nancy's. Yeah, yeah. This is the first one of hers that I have, and I'm like, pretty excited about it. I got a couple of. I think I have the Mike Sleeper canoe hanging at my house.
Right.
Yeah. Staple.
Talk about
the well-known.
Talk about history.
Yeah.
But I tell you though, it's the thing. Everybody who comes in, like, because I'm at the tables downstairs greeting customers when they come in, they walk in and they see like the one of the boat behind Mr. Rogers' house, the Crooked House there, and they go, "Is that Mike Sleepers?" And I'm like, "Your name is hanging right next to it," but it's like, no, they recognize your name, recognize your style of artwork. And I think that's a great thing, especially around here.
I really, I have a distinctive style in a couple of different ways, and that, so, primarily the shape.
And that's important. That's a great identifier right there. Having that almost nearly panoramic shot is great. But even your squares are, which actually threw me when those canvases came in. I'm like, is that Mike's? I'm like, he doesn't do canvas. He does his photography. But it really looked great on those, especially that square profile with that nice, kind of foggy day, or foggy morning with the boats. It looked great,
And that camera I use for that is a year older than me.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's a Hasselblad, and I was born in '64, and the camera dates from 1963.
Jeez.
Still using it. And,
right.
Is that specifically that type of camera? Is that specifically for a panoramic shot, or is that something
this is for the squares?
The square.
Okay.
Okay. So we're talking about a different.
Yeah, and square format photography was really big in the commercial business for decades. Because they would you could crop it either way. So
I got you. Yeah.
So you would run a photo shoot with the idea that you're cropping a vertical or a horizontal out of it, and generally a traditional shape.
That saves time too, so that way you don't have to shoot from two different cameras or do multiple change-outs and things. That makes sense. And it's funny how the trend comes back around now with everything being popular in square again. So.
But I don't. I see panoramically.
Right.
I always have. Even as a kid, I would take 35 millimeter images and I would crop it as a panoramic, and I just this way of looking at it, and then. If an image, if I can't get a panoramic image out of a scene I see, I start seeing details in it, and then the detail needs to be square. I have this aversion to standard formats for some reason. I don't know why. I mean, maybe aversion's a bad word, but I don't think that way.
Yeah.
And like 8x10, 11x14, or whatever. It's
the 2x3 format.
The 2x3 format.
Yeah.
It's either going to be 1:1 or 1:3. And
is that the when you're like learning as a photographer, is that something that is taught? I mean, like that format or those sizes, or is there like a standard
Well, in terms of artwork, photography certainly, it's there's just standard formats, which mostly arose out of 35 millimeter. So back in the day when Kodak was developing cameras, they were a lot of different formats. And
so it's the equipment that's kind of dictating the sizes in a lot of sense.
35 millimeter turned out to be sort of the real populist format that it all came down to the cameras. What it was, they started they were built in Germany, I think, and I can't remember who it would have been, Leica and Leica or Lights, and they started making pocket cameras in a 35 millimeter. You could run 24 or 36 images on a roll of film, and then that popularized, and that just transcended into art, and so that's always been sort of the standard format. And then once you got into press photographers prior to that, or actually at the same time, those back in the 20s and 30s, they had those big giant box cameras, the light with the bulb on the top.
accordion,
that sort of thing, and those were much bigger pieces of film, but that was directed towards that industry. But for some reason, believe me, I've got a lot of 35 millimeter. I've got, I don't know, I probably have at least 1 million images at this point.
I was going to say, with all the traveling you did, I follow you on
crazy.
Facebook, so I see all your posts from
Yeah.
back in the day when you were like Japan and all these other places, and I'm like, wow, yeah, he's been all over, but like.
And I'm closing in on, well, not quite. I'm closing in on about 45 years of taking photographs.
That's a long time, but again,
and I have
experience shows though.
I have every single one. I don't know if it's 1 million, but like right now I have 100,000 images just in my basement, going back to when I was 13 years old. So
Do you go back and reference them, or are some of those just going to be somebody's going to find them someday and
someone's going to find them and throw them out? Is what they're going to do.
Yeah.
Hopefully not.
The first 80,000 of them are awful, but
so there's no, you don't have to go back and review it at any point and try to find like a hidden gem in there.
no. What I do though is I when I go back through my files to find something, and because they're not very well organized,
Yep.
I'll find images and then I'll print them up and I'll put them on Facebook, or I'll send them to
Yep.
the people who rent them, and pictures from high school and stuff
Mhm.
like that. So it's a lot of fun. I documented everything. As soon as I
Did
got
you-
a camera, my friends are sick and tired. It's like,
Yeah.
now they're not. They love it.
Right, but back then it was like.
So even at even at the beginning stages in Marshfield High School, you were taking photos of everything.
I've got pictures I've got pictures from inside the classrooms. I've got pictures from the sports
Yep.
fields, pictures of people hanging out, and that's just revolving around school. Then
Yep.
I've got all of my personal stuff.
Yeah, and in the small world of the art on the South Shore too. Another, one of your teachers was one of another artist that comes in here on a regular basis. Who's one of the South Shore artists that I particularly like his style, Steve Bosnowski.
Steve Bosnowski.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was my first teacher. Well, he was my first photography teacher. We had another guy before him, a couple of people for art, and but he was the only one that knew how to manage us back in the day in high school.
I think there was a dark room in back in high school too.
Yeah, there was a dark room
think
back in high school, and
Yeah.
I think I've heard some stories about Steve banging on the door trying to get you guys out of there.
people are in there. We got the door locked. I can't open the door, Steve. We got the film out. And, it's going to ruin the film. And
That's funny. Yeah, and you're familiar with Steve's work too.
oh yeah, he's great.
Yeah, I think
Really nice work.
I think he's one of the. It's funny. I just don't. I don't think his style or the way he paints is appreciated enough, because I think he's one of the really, one of the better painters around on the South Shore. And he's it's funny, he probably has his hands in as a teacher to so many of the South Shore
absolutely.
artists that came,
Yeah.
especially a lot of the ones that came out of Marshfield, because he was such a
He doesn't me.
yeah.
And so yeah, absolutely.
But
He was there for decades.
yeah, so I'm sure that he's had his hand in a sense of teaching, or teaching styles and all sorts of things. But it's, interesting, in just a small world too.
Right,
So.
exactly.
And so I don't know if a lot of people know that you got your start in Marshfield. You're kind of a fixture there, but then you were at BC, and I was telling this story earlier to Michael Coyne about, you had told me that taking pictures of like Doug Flutie was one of your.
I've had a
breaks.
charmed life.
Yeah, I mean
things just fell into place, and I happened to be all these places at the, at the right time.
right time for Forrest Gump kind of.
Hey,
Exactly.
it's
Yeah,
compelling story.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if a lot of people even know that, but that was what your gig was at BC.
I always wanted to be a photographer, and
Yeah.
then obviously, because I'm talking about going back to my about 12 years old, but I graduated from Marshfield High, and I did a year in boarding school out in Western Mass at Northfield Mount Herman School, and I showed up there, and I got my camera gear, and I started taking sports pictures, and I started taking football pictures, and I got some decent stuff, and you figure it out. There's a formula to every sport. It's like where you're supposed to stand, and so then I ended up going to Boston College, and I roll in there, and it's like, so the first thing I did is join the student newspaper as a photojournalist.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of really interesting stories revolving around that. So I got there, and they said, we don't have anyone on the staff that knows how to take football pictures. So, okay, great. And I mean, I knew who Doug Flutie was, but I wasn't, I didn't quite know yet.
Right.
And so this is 1980. This is 1983. So this was his second year. This is the year when he really took off.
Mm-hmm.
And so next thing you know, I ended up traveling with the football team, and that lasted for 5 years. Every game.
Yeah.
Every game home and away, including, I was there for the Miami game and the bowl games and the Hail Mary.
Hail Mary, no kidding.
And and I was on the field, so I was one of those guys that you see that's running back and forth down the sideline with a big giant lens and
now those images, all the BC hung on to all those, or do you have some?
I
of
have
those
all of them.
You have all of those too.
And so anyway, they started paying me.
Yeah.
And so I was making money at it, and which was crazy, and
it's always nice.
Which is always nice when you're in college.
Yeah.
Get paid for something fun like that.
You got this.
And,
you're on the sideline.
Yeah.
You probably know. There's probably a lot of people that were paying to go to those games and didn't get to, paying a lot of money to travel with the team too, right?
And and I never get hit with a ball, and I never got knocked down. I almost did a bunch of times.
Oh yeah, I've seen those. You see those other people getting.
Oh yeah,
a couple of times it was pretty.
Probably
scary.
lose a couple cameras that way too. Right?
Yeah, and but the other
put
thing.
Some shoulder pads your cell phone there. Yeah.
So anyway, I made some money. So it was like, well, okay, yeah. So I always wanted to be a photographer. So I was like, okay, well, this is how I can make money.
Yep.
And then once I graduated, I ended up shooting a lot of sports for boarding schools and colleges. Yep. But at the same time, stepping back to the student newspaper thing, they were having me take portraits of people for newspaper articles, and people would come to campus to speak, and then they wanted me to take photographs of them, like press conference photos.
Yep.
So I photographed, Abby Hoffman and there's a whole slew of whoever would speak at college campuses back in the day.
Yeah.
So then I got out of that, and then immediately upon graduation, got a job as a photographer's assistant in Boston at a giant studio, and pretty much the hottest photographer going. And then left there and worked for another photographer who was an annual report photographer back when everyone did a big glossy magazine for a corporation. And I traveled around the world for 5 years, and I did 2 circumnavigations. It was it was like Boston, LA, Tokyo, Singapore, Bangkok, then back down to Australia, and then over to Switzerland. But I was young enough that I could handle it.
Right. Yeah.
So it was it would be like almost a month.
Yeah.
And then you get home, be home for 3 days. We're like, we got to go to London now. And it's like, all right.
And when you and that was the annual report type of photograph?
That was the annual report sort of stuff. And then I got out of that, and I became, a corporate photographer. I ended up working for John Hancock in Boston, where I met Lori.
Yep.
And
you guys were both. She's also.
Yes, and she had been there for a number of years before me, and so I did all of the PR photography work, and it was a huge department. There were 4 full-time photographers. There was a TV studio, videographers, the whole thing, and they would send us all over the world as well. So we travel all around doing that, but those were fun because they'd send you on all these junkets. So these salespeople would sell a certain amount of insurance, so they'd send you to down to the Caribbean for a week or Palm Springs, and it was always in January, February, into the spring. So I would.
Darn, the worst time to go to a tropical location.
And some of these, I was in St. Thomas for 2 weeks at one point.
Oh, that's nice.
And then they became sponsors of the Olympics and Major League Baseball. So they ended up sending us to Olympics. I went to Lillehammer for 2 weeks. And,
so when you were doing that, were you focusing more on doing portraits of the athletes, or were you shooting the actual sport? Were you shooting sports that were actually
a little bit of both?
Games?
So the company used that sort of work to sprinkle into all their PR stuff, and then but a lot of the photographs were photographing these agents, while they're out doing their stuff, and they'd send them out.
So it was more like
a lot of golf photographs
on location and where you're at.
So kind of documenting the agents and like what was going on with them.
So you do the stuff in the ballroom with the speakers and all that sort of thing, and that would go into the company newsletters. But then they'd have you go out to the golf course and photograph these guys playing golf and yucking it up, and they give those photographs to them. But I actually photographed a guy hitting a ball hole in one once.
Okay.
And from approaching the ball to the swing.
Yeah.
And then walked down, took a picture of the ball, then he ended up getting all those pictures mounted in his office.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure.
So,
I mean, what are the odds of hitting a hole in one are pretty slim, right? And then the odds of having someone documenting it,
having there, keep it on camera,
a personal photographer. I mean, there's like 3 images just of the swing.
No shit.
No
shit.
And
That's wild.
Yeah. So he was a great guy. I love being able to sort of witness that and be there and be able to give him the pictures afterwards. And
that's
so
awesome.
The company too.
That's wild. Yeah, I know that. Yeah, I think there's a lot of stories. I mean, I know that I've had the pleasure of knowing you for quite a while and doing a lot of work with you. So I've heard a number of the stories. But I think that's amazing stuff. The Canseco story sticks out at me. That was a fun.
Oh yeah, so well, this is what I talk about, a charmed life. So I was working as an assistant for this photographer, and he got the job of taking all the photographs for the Red Sox yearbook.
Yeah.
Which entailed us going to Fenway for at least a day, maybe 2 days, and we set up a miniature studio down outside the locker room, and it was in the spring, and the players came in one by one, and we had to take portraits of them, and then we did group pictures, and then there was a cover picture, and that was when Jose Canseco played for the Red Sox, and the art director came in, and we're going through all this stuff, and he said, "Oh, by the way, tell you something really important. You have to remember this. Don't say anything about Madonna when Jose comes in, because he had just had some public fling with her."
Oh boy!
And
you haven't heard this one?
No, I haven't heard this story.
And so we're in there. So he comes in, and we take his picture, and then he comes back in.
Was he a decent guy? Or?
Yeah, he was a really nice guy.
Yeah.
And they're all coming and cycling back and forth, and it's like, oh, let's get a picture of him, and I guess it was Move On, right at the time. Picture of him with Move On and that and the other. And then we had to do one more picture of him, which is I think it was his portrait.
Yeah.
And he came in and he sat down, and we reached to him and he's used to us, and we was just chatting away and snapping pictures. And an intern for the ad agency came walking in with beer or something, and walked in the door, and he hadn't gotten the memo.
Oh no.
So he walked in the door and just stepped right up and looked at Jose and said, "Hey, Jose, what about Madonna?" It was scripted. It was hilarious. And that was it for Jose. He just stood right up. He was out the door.
Oh.
And we had gotten our picture, thankfully, at that point. And the poor kid was like, "What did I do?"
No, limited. You didn't have to take too many pictures. There wasn't too many to choose from.
He hadn't gotten the memo, so.
Yeah, that's wild. I know that you got a ton of stories. I mean, that Hancock, was that for Hancock, or was that as an assistant?
That was just as an assistant.
Okay.
And so this stuff would crop up. I got hired once. I had a friend who worked at Harvard. He still does, and he worked for this, doing books or something for this think tank there, and the other people that were part of the think tank, they would come in yearly, were representatives of industry and armed forces and this, that, and I don't know what they were all discussing, economics or public policy or whatever. And I went over to visit him one day, and he's talking to him, and this guy was there for the Navy, and he said, "Oh no, we're going down to Norfolk tomorrow to take a tour of the naval base," and I said, "Do you need a photographer?" He said, "Well, yeah, actually, we do need a photographer." So
funny you should ask.
This was the next day, so I ended up going down to Norfolk, and we toured 4 or 5 ships. And we went through a submarine, went through a destroyer, guided missile deal, and all that. And then the next day we got up and got in a helicopter, and flew out to an aircraft carrier. for the day.
That's cool.
And that was bizarre because you just go and you go and you go and you go, and there's like that's the sea to the horizon.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden there's this little speck, and the door's open. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm leaning out the door and I'm looking out the
No kidding.
mile in the air or whatever it is. I don't know.
Oh yeah.
And then we land on this thing, and then the helicopter takes off, and then it's just photograph the jets flying in and out.
Yep.
And, it was nuts. But that's what I'm that was the whole thing of the photography. Just having the sort of skill set.
Yep.
And then getting into the industry on any level.
Mm-hmm.
Whether as an assistant or actually being the photographer.
Right.
You get to go to and see these things that are just.
Yeah.
It literally falls into your lap.
Yeah.
And,
Like I love the Fenway shots. The one in the inside the Green Monster is like one of my favorites. There, just seeing all of that.
Yeah, that was that was cool too. And I was there for I was there for the Jimmy Fund.
Oh, was it? Oh, Jimmy Fund, nice.
And I got there, first thing in the morning, and like early, it was 7:00 in the morning, and then in August when the light comes up over Fenway, when the sun rises. It streaks down the monster, and so it grazes it. So all of the detailing,
all the
comes
dentings,
out,
all the little things from the balls hitting it.
I've been looking at that wall since I was, since I was a toddler.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you see there. Why would you'd never see the wall at 7:00 in the morning?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you never see what it does.
Yeah.
And then every ball den.
Yeah.
And this is the old.
It just
ball.
looks like flat green when it's on
And
screen and TV.
Yeah, and then it's dimpled like a golf ball.
Yeah.
And it's astounding. I said, I got to get a picture of this. And and I asked them, and they were like, "Hey, we'll take you over there," because we weren't supposed to go on the field.
Oh, sure.
And we could. We couldn't. They didn't want us going on the grass.
Right.
We'd spend all day working on the warning track.
Mm-hmm.
And then I made connections with someone. Then I was able to go back and shoot the inside of the scoreboard a couple of years later.
Because not what you expect on the inside when you see that. I was like, just didn't expect all these numbered panels hanging on the wall with all these
covered with dust
things.
Yeah.
And,
what is that? Georgia clay? Is that what that is? That red clay.
the stuff they use for the field.
It all comes from someplace in Georgia, I think, and for all the ball fields or something.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that dust is all over the inside of it.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, those are some great shots. The other one of that collection, I like kind of. I'm still the footage marker when you can kind of like see it. There's like you can see it was painted over and adjusted. After what was the story behind that? Somebody
Dan Shaughnessy
complained.
Dan Shaughnessy looked at it one day. He says, "I don't think that's numbers right."
Yeah.
And they were like, "Mind your own business." Yeah, it is. It's Fenway Park. It is. And I can't. It's like 94.5 yards or something.
Yeah.
And that's what it says now.
Yeah.
And I have to look at it to remember.
Yep.
And then he was in the park all the time. So he showed up one day with one of those.
Yeah, one of those things. You push
The
those,
rolling.
yeah.
One of those things that
rolling rulers.
Yeah, and he measured it out. He was right. so they painted over it, and then they changed it.
Yeah.
And that's his I don't know, his mark. One of his marks. One of his claim to fame.
Yeah.
So the close friend of mine in Marshfield, he's very close friends with Dan Shaughnessy.
Yeah.
And Stan.
Does he own that? Does he have one of those images of yours?
Yeah, my friend gave it to him.
Yeah.
And Stan Grosfeld is the Pulitzer photographer as well. So he's friends with both of those guys.
Yeah.
And they get together like once a week. And so those Fenway pictures ended up they get accepted into the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown as part of the collection. And not the one of the number was changed, but the one of the inside of the scoreboard.
Yeah.
And then the Green Monster. And we were at so I can't remember how many years ago that was, and then I was at this holiday party about 5 years ago or something, right when Dan Shaughnessy got accepted into the Hall of Fame himself.
Yep.
And he wasn't at the party, but Stan Grosfeld was. And at the end of the night, we'd be yucking it up all night, and I'd had a couple of drinks as usual, right? And just joking around, and then Stan left, and he's walking up the driveway, and And I yelled out the door, "Hey, Stan, make sure you tell Dan, welcome to the club.
Yeah.
It's great being in the Hall of
Oh,
Fame."
no shit.
I didn't think he thought it was too funny.
No, he didn't.
I know Dan wouldn't think it was funny.
No.
I mean, obviously, his contribution is real. Mine's
Yeah.
just sort of, kind of fun,
yeah.
right? And so, yeah.
It's not how you get there, right? It's
I guess.
you got there.
That's it, yeah.
That's fun. I think that those are unbelievable images, and I was a big fan of them for a while, but I think I've seen too many of them. Do you have those ones hanging at home?
No. That was my in volume, and there was an unnumbered edition.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I did it unnumbered but I priced it. They were priced very low.
Now, do you think those ones aren't moving as much now because you've cornered because everybody has one, or do you feel like it's
Tom Brady ruined my business.
You think that's what it was?
Yep.
Yeah, the shift in sports and the
and it was like literally Tom Brady destroyed my business. my Fenway Park
Went from Red Sox to
photograph
Patriots.
business. It was So I made a bunch of merchandise and went along with it, as you know.
Yeah.
And I drink coasters and coffee mugs, and I was selling them in all these shops all over New England, and that went really well for 2 or 3 years. And it just people, more and more.
No, I feel like we used to we would be framing them like
It's crazy, yeah.
dozens a week, and then it kind of dried up. So I wasn't sure, but I never really made that connection. The timing kind of,
and then all of a sudden, of course, it peaks at Christmas time or whatever. And,
I remember selling cases of those mugs at Christmas, the 4-pack, and then people would come, "I want 3 of those." I'm like, "All right."
And so anyway, that fall, whatever that fall was, when the Patriots won the Super Bowl that year, and they sold really well right up until Christmas.
Yeah.
And then the next spring, I called around to the shops, so you'd get springtime orders in, opening days pretty soon. And they were like, "What do you have with the Patriots?" Literally, they all said it, and it's like, "Oh, I don't have anything." But so anyway, that was it. It literally stopped dead, which is fine. I mean, it was a great run. It was a lot of fun, and so my biggest year, I sold 1,000 prints, and then of the Green Monster, let alone the inside.
Yeah.
And I think I'm down to maybe 1 a year now.
Yeah.
So, but maybe it is saturated. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you did sell a lot.
Well, Tom's gone now, so all we need is a World Series to get you back.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. But it's ubiquitous. It shows up everywhere.
Yeah.
And I have an accountant who is doing my retirement stuff, and when I went over to his office for the first time for a meet and greet, and we sat down, I was like, well. He's like, "So what exactly is the nature of your work?" And, the photography, weddings and stuff. I said, "No, I do landscapes." I said, "But I also have a Fenway series, and as a matter of fact, that picture over your head is mine." You have no idea. And
well, that goes back to that, I think we've had this conversation. Your signature needs to improve so that so people can read it.
Well, back then, so it looked like a seagull. And now I block print it. And I would show my work at the North River Arts Festival, and my grade school teacher Natalie Loomis would come by, and we talk every year, and she was always with a group of people, and every year she would turn to everyone to say, she says, "I did not teach him to write like that." It was really funny.
Well, they say about signatures, you're an artist, an actor, or a doctor if you have a signature like that. So.
Right, yeah. So, but every once in a while I'll have someone contact me and say, I've had this print for 15 years and I think I want a bigger one, and we spent 8 years trying to figure out who it was, and because I couldn't read your signature.
I mean that's an important part, important aspect.
That is a good note to pick up on that there. But like we get people in, like I said, your the one that's downstairs currently, the like I said, the one for Mr. Rogers has Crooked House.
Yes.
What's that one called again?
Matic Autumn.
Right.
Yeah.
And people just love that one. The frame on it, the picture, the whole thing, the whole color palette on that one. And didn't you have a story like you went and shot it and it was a crappy day?
Yeah, I went shot. It was an overcast day, and I had never been there before.
Right.
And Lori and I were down there for our anniversary weekend in November. And it was the end of the day. It was overcast anyway, and it was in November. And early December. Anyway, it was late in the season, and or after the season. So anyway, we drove out there, and I had my gear with me this trip, and we drove out there. At the end of the day, I was like, oh wow, look at that! That's amazing. The thing I like about it is it's I think one of the biggest parts about Nantucket is the houses and their juxtaposition to nature. And
right.
That's what but even downtown, the architecture is amazing. But when you get out to the outer parts of Nantucket and you see these weathered buildings, and they're just beautiful. And,
that gray shingling that's on there. That's great.
Gray shingling and white trim. And
right.
That one feels like a Wyeth painting to me.
It looked like a Wyeth painting when I pulled up.
When you pulled up,
Yeah, it's like, wow, look at this. Because it wasn't just the building, it was the boat, too.
Yeah.
The whole palette, from the sky to the
and then the
grasses
color in the boat.
Yeah.
The boat doesn't have some crazy red hull or and
it's a really soft yellow, but it becomes electric against everything else that's there, which is great.
And the light was at the time I thought it was really terrible, and it's like, well, I got to shoot this anyway, and because I don't know if I'm going to get back out here tomorrow, and I don't know what the light's going to be like tomorrow, but I'll just why not? I'm here, and I shot it, and I shot I shot quite a bit of film. I shot about 10 rolls of film or something, and with the light fading, and then the next day, we did go back, and the sun was out the next day, and it went back at the same time, and I shot it the next day. Another 10 rolls of film or whatever, and because if I see a scene that I think is going to be like great, like really iconic, it's like, I'll just,
Yeah, that one's fantastic.
just shoot film and just keep shooting, because I've got no feedback until it comes back from the lab.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I shot it anyway. I shot it, and then the.
And you had a feel for which day would produce
Oh,
better
it was going to be the
images?
second day with the light. It was a nice. It was a soft light, and it was streaking down the side of the boat, and this, that, and that. I got the film back. I was like, boy, was I wrong. And it was the first day, and that's one of the things I really like about shooting film is, sometimes you don't. You get something better than you expected. I'm really good at predicting. I never blow exposure anymore. I never blow up focus because I can't focus my camera. I have to focus it by, gauging the distance.
Right.
And I can't look through it like you would any other normal camera, and then focus it looking through it. And so I've got to the point now where I really never ever miss up. That sort of stuff, and the exposure and the focus and whatnot, and then, but sometimes film will react differently, and it reacted really well in a really dim light, and then the next day, it's a film I use all the time. The next day, it didn't. It didn't. I think it was fine. If I'd been there only the next day, it would have been like, this is the greatest thing ever.
Right.
But I much preferred the first one.
Yeah.
And then I got the film processed, and I got the test prints done, and I got a big print, and I put it up online, and a friend of mine from the neighborhood goes, oh, that's what's his name? Mr. Rogers. What's his first name?
Fred Rogers.
Yeah. He says, that's Fred Rogers' boat. And I was like, oh, great, because this friend of mine's got a place on, and his in-laws live in Nantucket. And so he's down there all the time. And I'm like, oh, okay, great. And I'm thinking to myself, who the hell is Fred Rogers, right? Because he knows everyone in Nantucket, so he knows this guy named Fred Rogers. Yeah. And then it was like, no, Mr. Rogers. And it's like, oh, okay. And so I guess it's his boat. And that cottage there or the cottage across or something, I don't know. So that boat now lives there permanently in the marsh, and they upkeep it a little bit. It's not like the JFK boat behind the library in Boston where they're constantly maintaining it, and keeping it perfect. It sits there, and it the paint fades a little bit, and I guess they keep it up a certain extent.
Right.
But it looks perfect because it's weathered.
Right. Yeah. It's out in the elements. It's not just putting
Right.
putting a boathouse each year. And taking
And so
out,
then,
you know.
so the next summer, I did a show in Nantucket, and I was displaying that because I had this collection from Nantucket at that point. And this guy walked up and said, "Oh, my father built that boat."
Okay.
So,
Oh,
what?
jeez.
And we had a nice long conversation, and his father only built like 2 boats a year or 1 boat a year. It's not a very big boat.
Yeah.
And I think he just essentially did it on the side. And he said, "Yeah, I remember when he built it and he delivered it."
Yeah, it was like a hobbyist kind of thing. Like, and then once it was built, sell it, and then make the next one.
So
kind
he
of
built it for Fred Rogers, and
That's funny.
So you never know.
Yeah, but I get so many stories from people the exact same thing. It said
Yeah.
I was when it first went up. One of the people I had, and goes, "Oh, you got Roger's boat up there," and I'm like, "Roger's boat?" And he's like, "I'm like." Sure, yeah, I got Roger's boat up there. I'm like, I haven't talked to Mike about this yet. I don't know anything about it. He goes, "Yeah, you know him, right?" I'm like, "No, I don't know him." He goes, "Of course you know him. He's your neighbor." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's
That's
like,
hilarious.
He starts
Yeah.
singing the theme song. I'm like, "Oh, that
Mr.
Mr. Rogers.
Rogers,
Oh, okay." I'm like, so, but it's funny how just a little thing like that,
Yeah.
somebody recognized it right away, and it's to me that's a great sign that it's highly recognizable. It means something to somebody,
So
which is great.
I guess it's an iconic scene, and I had no idea.
Yeah.
I'd been in Connecticut before, but I had never been out this road. And or maybe I've been out there in the middle of the day on the way to the beach and just drove by it and didn't notice it.
Yeah, another house out in the
Another house, another boat, whatever. So
Yeah, that one ends up at my house eventually. If it does, it's downstairs for
There's
a
a
bit.
theme of things on the wall downstairs that seem to want to end up at your house.
That's kind of
I think we had the same conversation when Sean was here.
Exactly. Well, I mean, that's the benefit of owning or operating a frame store. You
Pick
get
and
stuff on the
choose.
wall here.
well, you get
As
the,
it's-
that's what I was going to say because you brought that up earlier. So you get the first pick of stuff that comes through.
Yeah,
unless it's already sold. It's just like-
unfortunately, I have to pay bills too. So
Yeah.
if somebody wants to pay for it first, it does. Because I know I have the option of of another one coming across and being able to replicate it again. But first right of refusal. I guess in a lot of cases. I did it for a number of years at North River when I was hanging that show too. I was just hey, I'm done hanging it. It's almost ready for the general public to see. But guess what? Mark that one sold because I want that.
Yep.
So I've got a number of pieces at home that are
And then there's things that probably got away from you too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Collecting artwork, and I mean, for me, like I said, a big part of collecting artwork is people, the stories behind some of the stuff.
Yeah.
And like I said, I have your canoe at home, which it fits in this perfect space. Somebody else that lives there, my wife, loves that image too, and it fits perfectly. And then that one downstairs will end up, the image will. I don't know if it'll be that particular one someday, but having the stories behind it and the connections, I think, is so important. And I got to, I'm slowly have begun to collect a who's who of this South Shore art scene, which is pretty cool. But having those regrets of a couple pieces of artwork that I didn't buy, I'm like, oh shit, years later, it's like, oh, I was thinking about I remember one piece that I got away from me. I wanted to pull the trigger on it, and I never did. And it's like, that image is now it's probably 10 times better than it even was. But
there's a Nancy Colella piece that I just want it so bad. And it's like 15 years old or something.
Yeah.
And a friend of hers owns it. And I was like, someday I gotta work a deal, trade.
I was gonna say, you and David trade
or buy it. I don't know.
This lovely new piece.
I have a funny one with that. So there was a piece of Brooks Kelly. You remember Brooks Kelly? Yeah. That he brought in to frame, because so again, I've seen all these pieces before they actually hit galleries, because people are finishing them off, and it was a piece he did after Bobby Kennedy was killed, and it's just the words assassin, and it's in a palette that's nothing like Brooks's, and I had told him that I wanted it, and. It kind of got away from me, and then when he passed and his wife put the stuff together, she reached out to me because she knew that I,
Really?
Yeah, she was aware that,
That's a great
and I have
story,
that hanging in my house, and that's one of my favorite pieces.
Right.
And it was very different from his style because he painted with very colorful palette and a lot of his stuff, and this one was just very dark, and it was. But it was, you could still see his style in it.
Right, yeah.
And it's an awesome piece. And then that other part of the story too, that she kind of reached out to me to see if I wanted to buy, see if I wanted it.
There's a
it's
personal
just
history to this.
amazing. And he was, he was coming in here when I was a kid.
Yep.
And, he's, and which is funny to me. Like when I think of a lot of these super talented, unbelievable artists that I know, and I'm like, yourself included,
right,
but they're not that amazing. They're who they are first. He's like, oh, Mike Sleeper, the photographer. Like, yeah, it's Mike Sleeper.
It's Mike. Yeah, we know Mike.
I had the I the other day, me and Mike coined. I don't know if I told you this one, Scott. Mike. We hung a couple pieces at a place in a financial institute over in Hingham, and I had to go back and make an adjustment on one of the pieces because the photographer, it was a triptych, and the one of the pieces just didn't line up properly. So we hung it, and we're like, well, we'll get the new image printed, and we'll, so I dropped it off, and that was, I didn't realize until after you guys left that was Michael Coyne. And this one is in awe. I'm like, oh,
That's hilarious.
He's your hanging guy?
He helps you hang paintings. It's just so funny. I don't think anything of it. It's just it's Mike.
Right.
Who's another.
I didn't know he was a painter at first because he used to hang around and help you around with so many projects. I thought he was just somebody you knew that was coming in. And I was like, oh, that's him? Same thing. It's like, everybody just becomes so familiar here after being here for so long. It's nice. It's when everybody gets that kind of shock value of and everybody's like, oh, I love that picture that's on the wall, and I'm like, well, that was him. He just walked by. He just went out the door, and they're like, that was him. I'm like, yeah. He just comes right in, and goes out back. That's what he needs to do, and we don't even have to think. We got all this stuff. We know the sizes. We know everything. It just it comes in and gets it done and gets to just go right on his way. So it's nice.
Well, there's a great vibe here too. I love coming in and running into these other artists. It's like a reunion all the time.
Yeah.
And I come in and see Donna once in a while.
Yeah.
Donna Rossetti Bailey.
Yeah. She's in
Nancy Clella every once in a while, and it's just really cool.
Maybe we can get them on the show too. That'd be nice too.
Right. One after the next. I think that having Mike in was fantastic.
This
I don't
mean
to cut it short, but
I'm
gonna have to run up. But I think we're gonna have you back on.
Didn't realize it's almost been an hour already. And see, that's a good sign, and you don't even realize it's been that long.
But much like when we were talking with Sean, I think it's just great conversation. I think that having some of this stuff out there enhances you I don't know, maybe there's an in between of this people looking to you as this amazing artist and hearing some of the other stories behind you too. But it's a pleasure having you in. I hope we can have
a lot of fun.
Hope you actually jump you back on there.
Yeah, anytime. I like to run my mouth.
I think you have a ton of great stories.
The personal attachment that people can add to the artwork with that kind of stuff is always a great thing. It's, some people can't ever get to meet an artist because, again, a photographer thing, they're not on. It's not like an actor or anybody else where you can see their works, find interviews. It's hard to find that kind of stuff. So have an outlet like this will be a great way to get people to introduce to you.
Absolutely,
haven't met you yet.
People, and. Just a guy from Marshfield, and
he just happens to be an unbelievable photographer.
Exactly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us. So that's great.
Super.
All right. Well,
excellent.
We're gonna have to
looking forward to the next one.
Mike Sleeper Part 1.
Yeah, Part 1.
And
yes.
Then we'll have to jump into Mike Sleeper Part 2. I know just from the years of knowing you that there's a lot more stories.
We have some more stories.
We probably pull a couple of them out of you.
I forget them, and it'll be any particular image, and and then I forget about it, and the stories would just come out of my head. I was like, oh yeah, I hear what happened at that shoot. And
maybe you can tell the John
I
Daly.
get chased by a raccoon.
Maybe when you can get you back on, you can tell the John Daly story.
The John Daly story.
Bring in a couple of weird ones that trigger
one.
some memories. We'll put the picture up so people can visually reference it when we do the and do it that way. It'd be a great way.
Do a whole episode just in the canoe. So.
Yeah. I think we certainly could.
It's on your business card, man. I mean, that artist card you have. That's again definitely something. I go, oh, do you have his card? I'm like, yeah, I got one out back. Hold on, I come back and I got this, giant fold out with them. And there's this one, and then this one, and this one. It was a great card, and having the canoe right in the front, it's definitely the thing people recognize you by. So.
Canoe's a big deal.
Yeah.
So.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Well, thanks, Mike, and I think we'll
we'll cut it there, and we'll see everybody next time.
Awesome.
The next one. Thanks. All right.
Thanks.